Hello subscribers, welcome back to my channel. It's Riaz from London, and this month I'm bringing you a side of the Al Saud family that most documentaries skip right past. We've all seen the palaces, the private jets, the gold-plated everything. Vaults filled with treasures that most of us will never lay eyes on in our lifetime. And if you've been with me for a while, you already know I've taken you inside that world before. The wealth, the scale, the sheer size of what this family controls. But wealth was never the most interesting part of this story. Behind every vault, behind every headline about billion-dollar business deals, there's a quieter story that almost nobody tells. A story written not in gold, but in impact. Today, we're making that shift, from the secret vaults to something far more valuable, the living legacy. The women of the House of Saud who are quietly reshaping what it actually means to hold power in the kingdom. 3 princesses, 3 completely different paths, one shared purpose, turning privilege into progress, and using a platform most people could only dream of to change lives most people will never hear about. Let's get into it. Princess Amira Al Tawil, the advocate. Our first story belongs to Princess Amira Al Tawil, a name that for over a decade has been synonymous with women's rights advocacy in Saudi Arabia, and increasingly across the wider region too. Amira has spent years working through the Al Walid Philanthropies, one of the largest charitable foundations in the Gulf, directing resources toward poverty alleviation and disaster relief on a genuinely global scale. We're talking about aid reaching refugee camps, communities rebuilding after natural disasters, and regions where international support often arrives far too late, if it arrives at all. But here's what actually sets her apart. It isn't the size of the checks being written, it's the causes she chose to attach her name to. At a time when speaking openly about women's rights in the Gulf carried real personal and political risk, Amira did it publicly, and did it consistently, using her platform to push conversations that many people in her position would have quietly avoided for the sake of comfort. She didn't just fund change from a distance. Her work put her directly into refugee camps, into disaster zones, into communities that rarely see anyone from the royal family up close, let alone someone willing to listen. And it's worth pointing out just how unusual that is. In a region where royal women have historically operated behind the scenes, Amira chose visibility. Interviews, public statements, international forums. She showed up to the conversations that mattered, even when staying silent would have been the safer, easier choice. That decision alone opened the door for other royal women to follow a similar path, which is exactly why her name keeps coming up whenever this topic is discussed. And that's really the theme running through this entire video. Titles open doors. What you do once you're through them is what actually defines a legacy. Princess Rima bint Bandar, from boardroom to embassy. Our second story takes us from grassroots advocacy into the world of global diplomacy. Princess Rima bint Bandar. Today, most people recognize her as one of the most prominent diplomats representing Saudi Arabia on the international stage. But long before the embassies and the state visits, Rima built her reputation somewhere much closer to home, in breast cancer awareness campaigns and sports development programs that quietly changed what was considered possible for women in the kingdom. She was among the key figures who pushed to open doors, quite literally, gym doors, stadium doors, fitness center doors, for Saudi women at a time when that kind of access simply didn't exist. Think about that for a second. Something as basic as a woman being able to walk into a gym was, not that long ago, a genuine milestone worth fighting for. Rima was one of the people fighting for it. That groundwork didn't just build her personal career. It became proof of something much bigger about the royal family itself, that their influence isn't confined to business empires, oil deals, and closed-door negotiations. It extends into public health initiatives, into sports facilities, into everyday spaces where ordinary Saudi citizens actually felt the difference in their own lives, not just read about it in a headline. Her transition into diplomacy afterward almost feels like the natural next step. Once you've spent years building trust at the community level, representing your country on a global stage becomes less about formal titles and more about credibility you've already earned. That's a distinction worth sitting with. She didn't arrive at diplomacy through political connections alone. She earned the platform first, and the ambassadorship followed. Princess Adila bint Abdullah, guardian of heritage and family al. Our final story is about preservation of culture, and preservation of the people society most often overlooks. Princess Adila bint Abdullah has built her legacy around two things that rarely get the spotlight: safeguarding Saudi heritage for future generations, and supporting charitable organizations tackling family health and domestic violence awareness. These aren't the causes that trend on social media. They don't come with ribbon-cutting ceremonies or international press coverage. They're the causes that work quietly, inside homes, inside communities, addressing problems that most public figures would rather not even acknowledge exist. And yet that work matters just as much, arguably more, than anything discussed in a boardroom or announced at a summit. Adila's focus reminds us that real legacy isn't only about what gets built in public. Sometimes it's about what gets protected in private: a family's safety, a nation's history, a community's dignity. Heritage preservation might sound like a quieter cause compared to advocacy or diplomacy, but think about what it actually protects. Traditions, art, architecture, an entire cultural identity that could easily be lost in a country modernizing as rapidly as Saudi Arabia is right now. Pairing that work with support for domestic violence awareness shows a princess thinking about legacy on two very different timelines at once, protecting the past while also protecting the present. Closing three princesses. Three completely different missions. One pattern that keeps repeating throughout this entire family's story. Real influence isn't only measured in what sits behind the palace walls. It's measured in what gets built beyond them. So the next time you see a headline about Saudi wealth, remember there's another side to this story too. One that doesn't always make it into the news, but absolutely deserves to be told. Three women, three different lanes, and yet the same quiet lesson underneath all of it. The biggest platforms don't mean much unless someone actually chooses to use them for something bigger than themselves. If today's video gave you a fresh perspective on the House of Saud, make sure you're subscribed, because there is a lot more of this history still to uncover. And if you want more behind-the-scenes content between uploads, follow me on Instagram at RIAZ8550. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.